Not so long ago, I was at my country house, and there I noticed strange things outside my window at night. That night eventually turned into something terrible. Something that I'm still afraid to remember. Something that is still beyond my understanding. It's better to start from the very beginning. A long time ago, I inherited the country house from my late great-grandmother. It wasn't big, but quite enough for living. Once it was a beautiful house, but time has taken its toll. The plaster has fallen over, the wood has rotted, and the backyard overgrown with weeds over time. I didn't even live there constantly. It was more like a refugee from the city's bustle, where I could relax in the fresh air, have a drink, and barbecue with friends. But sometimes I just stop by to take a look if everything is okay, but mostly it hadn't any damage. Don't take it as some falling apart building. It was just an old house in not that good condition, but not that bad either. As I said earlier, I didn't go there often, so this story will be about that rare visit when I stopped there for the night. It was Friday. I was walking from work with the idea that the next 2 days I would spend in peace and quiet. I've wanted to go there for a long time, but it was impossible because of the weather conditions. It was snowing, then it was melting, making mud, and I had no desire to get stuck in the mud somewhere. Most likely I wouldn't get to the countryside, since it is literally in the middle of nowhere, so there's no normal road there. Well, what can I say? Even though it was a wilderness, people still lived there. I think nearly 100 people were there. Mostly they were pensioners. So that day, I was walking down the street. The weather was perfect. There was no wind or clouds. Spring was coming. The snow had melted, and most of the mud had dried up. I was already looking forward to the smell of barbecue, the singing of birds, and the fresh air. You may be surprised, but I like to go there alone. I'm not a fan of loud parties with friends. I have enough of it in the city. While in the village, I like to let my body and soul relax. That evening, I went to the store, bought some meat, vegetables, and several bottles of tasty beer. That was enough for me to break from a hard-working week. At home, I packed my small backpack, had dinner, took a shower, and then went to bed. I was terribly tired, so I passed out instantly as soon as I reached the pillow. In the morning, a cold shower and hot coffee helped me to wake up, and the sunny weather outside made my day. I started to pack my things, but I didn't have a lot of stuff. Just food, beer, money, a couple of old rags, and detergent, because I was sure that during my absence everything there was covered with a thick layer of dust, and I had no intention to breathe it. About noon I left the flat and got into the car. The engine hummed, and I drove away. The village was only 10 miles from the city, so the road didn't take long. Actually, it's hardly the road. It was quite normal at the beginning, but after the turn from the main road, nothing of the road was left at all. After such a trip, you'll definitely need the suspension repaired. So I reached my destination in a little less than an hour. My little house was waiting for me there as always. Nothing has changed at all. Only when I went closer I found that the foundation crumbled a little. It's better to grab some cement and repair it next time, I thought while turning the key in the lock. Inside, as I expected, I was greeted by the smell of dampness, coolness, and of course, dust. After changing my clothes, I began to wipe, sweep, and wash the floor, and of course, vacuuming the carpets. There were too many of them. Well, after finishing all the work, I took out the grandfather's old, but still, quite a decent barbecue from the shed, and placed it in the backyard, under the apple tree. Last year I made a table with benches there, so I lit a fire, took out the meat, and opened the bottle of beer. It's so good, I said, and sat down on the bench. I want to tell you about one more detail. My backyard can be seen from my bedroom, where I usually spent the night. It wasn't big at all, and it was all surrounded by a wooden fence. I'll be talking about exactly this fence later. The coals had already come up, and I placed the meat on the barbecue. The smell was flowing around. I almost could hear the old ladies drooling behind the fence. I'll skip the details in order not to tease you, and move on to the moment when I finished the meal. It slowly began to get dark on the street. Surprisingly, it was still warm outside, so I sat comfortably and turned on YouTube. Fortunately, the mobile internet covered this area, so I began to surf the vastness of video hosting. I didn't even notice when it became quite dark, and the street lamps turned on behind the fence. Suddenly, a sound brought me out of the state of complete peace and contentment. It came from behind the fence. Someone was wrestling there. I thought it was some dog or cat. After all, there were plenty of animals there. It will dig a little and go away. Well, what else could I think? But it didn't go away. The wrestling under the fence lasted probably 20 minutes, and it was just so insistent, as if something specifically wanted to attract my attention. And it did. I got up from the bench and went to the end of the backyard to see what was there. When I got to the fence and looked over it, nothing was there, and the rustling stopped once I got there. After looking around and scratching my head, I returned back. It was getting cold, so I needed to light the stove so as not to freeze at night. That's why I gathered everything and went into the house. I lit the stove and the house was filled with heat in a matter of minutes, and as soon as I decided to relax, I heard a car's alarm. Well, that was definitely mine, because there were no other cars, unfortunately. It was standing behind the fence because there was not enough space in the yard. I was on my guard. I had left the house, turned the key towards the car, and turned off the alarm. When I returned to the house, the alarm was triggered one more time. What the hell is happening? I swore and already went out to check everything. I saw the car standing as it was, walked around and checked once again. That's strange. It seems that there's nothing to fall. But what could trigger the alarm? Some kind of crap, I said. But still, I went back into the house and continued my relaxation, throwing these events out of my head. Until one moment. The night followed the day, and sleep began to take its toll. I made up the bed and went into the kitchen to brush my teeth and wash my face. The washstand was standing just opposite the bedroom, so I completely saw the window in the mirror, and everything that was happening behind it. Now you'll understand why I give those details. While I was brushing my teeth, I took a glance into the mirror and noticed that there was someone behind the fence. I could see everything clearly because there was a street lamp just behind the fence. So I was looking outside when suddenly something flashed. I thought it was my imagination, but in a second I realized that it was real, because someone appeared again. My fence wasn't really high there. To be honest, I was alarmed by this. Well, it definitely couldn't be some old lady wandering around. Having brushed my teeth, I spat water into the bucket, raised my eyes again to the mirror, and thought I would fall off my feet, honestly. And after a few seconds, I realized that this was not the worst option. I did so, and quickly laid down on the floor, all because of a huge figure behind the fence. It stared at me through the mirror. It appeared so suddenly that I didn't understand anything at first, and already from the floor, raising my head, I looked into the mirror one more time. It was still there, and it was looking right through the window. Lord, what kind of monster is that? You can trust me or not, but there was some kind of creepy shit. Maybe when I glanced for the first time, I thought that it seemed to me, but then when I looked closely, I was convinced that it was an absolutely real damn thing. There really was someone standing and staring. To be honest, I was seized with fear. At first, I was paralyzed. A lump rose in my throat, and I couldn't even breathe. But in a few minutes, I tried to quietly crawl to the front door in order to lock it. I went out into the corridor and heard a tree breaking. Then the boards on the fence were broken. Or it's better to say that someone broke them. I looked in the mirror from the corridor and understood that the creature behind the fence started to destroy it methodically, board by board. But the most creepy thing was baby snuffling produced by the monster. I still can't describe in words what I felt then. It was genuine horror and shock. The creature was clearly visible in the light of the street lamp, and this didn't bother it at all. Then, suddenly, the sound stopped, and its snuffling stopped too. What's going on here? I thought to myself. What the hell is that over there behind the fence? Maybe the beer wasn't fresh or something. No, that was not the thing. Something supernatural happened there, since it was about 50 yards away from me. I didn't really get a good look at it. I saw only a huge light silhouette. All this time I stood in the corridor and was afraid to get into the living room so that, God forbid, it would not notice me. Although I think it has already seen me. Then why did it fall silent? And just as I was thinking about it, the car alarm screeched again. I quickly looked around the corner and found no one behind the fence. The alarm went off again and again. As soon as it stopped yelling, it was triggered again, and I was just about to quietly go into the room in order to take the keys and turn it off when there was a knock on the door. Of course, the door was old, without a peephole, but something told me that even if it was there, it would clearly not be worth looking through it. Then there was another knock, harder than the previous one. Dude, I've almost shit my pants. It was the first time I've been so scared. I was standing in the hall and just didn't know what to do. The terrible idea that there was something incomprehensible and terrible behind the door paralyzed me. I wouldn't have thought so, and wouldn't have said so if I hadn't seen it 10 minutes ago behind the fence in the light of a street lamp. It wasn't a human being, obviously. I could say for sure that it was some kind of otherworldly bastard. The knocking on the door didn't stop for a single moment, and a strange grunt could be heard. I was completely at a loss. There was no plan of action, but after a couple of minutes, I finally pulled myself together and tried to move. I took another glance out of the window, but there was no one behind the fence. I moved around the house, trying not to get into the field of view of the creature that was still knocking at the door. But my most fatal mistake was that I decided to hide myself by turning off the lights all over the house. After the lights went out, whatever was wandering around the house just seemed to go crazy. It began to run frantically in the yard. I heard the sounds of footsteps. I heard the snuffling, and it suddenly fell silent. And only then did I notice that it decided to peer into the darkness through the window. Damn! What a terrible monster it was. For God's sake. Now I have seen it up close and, to be honest, dread was thick as nausea in my stomach. At first glance, it was huge. To be precise, its head was huge, though its body wasn't small either. It was leaning against the glass, and I could feel it trying to find me in the dark of the room. I could see it because it was lighter on the street than in the house. In general, it looked like a human, but some parts of the body were much bigger and looked somehow disproportionately. It was some kind of brown or something. I remember the black eyes, the same black hollow instead of a mouth, and dark black eyes which were trying to find me. It stared through the window for about 10 minutes, then got on all fours and ran away somewhere to the broken fence. It moved like a lame dog. Within seconds, it was gone, hidden in the darkness behind a fence and a street lamp. I stood under the wall like a guilty child and thought to myself, what the hell was that just now? I stood there for I don't remember how long, and when I was sure that there was no sounds of footsteps or anything like that outside, I finally stepped out of the shadows. But when I entered the bedroom, I realized that it had not gone anywhere. It was standing behind the fence again, staring in the direction of my house, in the same position as the first time when I saw it, just raising its huge head over the broken boards. Oh my gosh! What do you want from me? Again, it apparently noticed some movement in the house and started to move towards me, but this time from the side of the broken fence. And in the dark, I felt as if it had found me, as if it was looking straight into my eyes. I stood under the wall and did not move at all. I tried with all my remaining strength to pretend that I wasn't there, that the monster just imagined it, but it must have known I was inside. Otherwise, it wouldn't have started smashing the windows in the house. Yeah, it came right up to the bedroom windows, looked through them, then there was a couple of thuds, and the glass fell to the floor. This event just made me start doing something, and I couldn't think of anything better than just putting on the first thing that came to hand and running out of the house. I was lucky to do it in the nick of the moment, because just as I locked the door, I heard quick footsteps inside. It seemed as if the roles were reversed, and it was already looking at me standing on the street from the window of my house. But apparently, the monster inside was in no hurry to get out of it. It just stood there and stared at me. I ran out of the yard as fast as I could to get in the car. What a terrible picture opened up in front of me. The light of the street lamps was still on and my car was still standing right on the street, but only all the houses around, which were in good condition this afternoon, as always in this village, have changed. When I arrived, everything was fine. People were living in those houses, but now they stood as if abandoned, destroyed and leaning, overgrown with some bushes and trees that I had never seen before. What the hell is going on here? I thought to myself as I got into the car and turned the key in the ignition. The engine surprisingly started the first time, and I managed to get out of the village. I was driving home, and every now and then, I turned around to make sure that I wasn't followed by that terrible creature that was standing behind the fence.